Our next topic of the session talks about institutions of the future. Session panelists for this session are Mr. Ashish Dhawan, founder, Central Square Foundation. Ashish had a successful investing career for 2 decades as the founder of one of India's private equity funds, Chris Capital. He co-founded one of India's most ambitious projects in higher education, Ashoka University, as a pioneer initiative to promote the idea of broad liberal arts and sciences undergraduate curriculum in a country obsessed with narrow specialization. And Mr. Neeraj Agarwal, Chairman Asia Pacific Boston Consulting Group, which includes overseeing business in Australia, China, India, Japan, South Korea, and Southeast Asia. He is a member of BCG's Global Executive Committee. Neeraj has over 25 years of experience with clients spanning multiple sectors and has worked across geographies ranging across Asia Pacific, Europe, and North America. Neeraj is very passionate about using technology to leapfrog development and large-scale change. And the anchor for this session is Mr. Vineet Gupta.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session on institutions of the future. I'm very excited to be joined here by Ashish and Neeraj, both of whom are, of course, industry stalwarts, but also extremely close friends. I've been involved in test prep education for a long time. I've been managing director of Jamboree. We coach students on GMAT, GRE, SAT. But for the last 13 years, my passion also has been to build outstanding higher educational institutions in India. Some of us got onto that journey in 2007, which resulted in the making of Ashoka University. Ashish is here and we've been on this journey together. It's been a fun journey. Then some of us came together in 2016, and this time with the idea of reimagining technology education. That journey has just started and we are on to building Plaksha University. Neeraj and I know each other from college, but of course we started to work together more closely as we started to build Plaksha. Both of these have been outstandingly exciting journeys, if I may say. They're very similar efforts. They are very similar in the way both institutions are getting founded. They are both philanthropic and broad-based. There are large number of donors in each venture. The idea is to build something outstanding. The idea is to build something excellent. So all of us come together on the table to build an excellent institution. Ashoka today has close to 130 plus donors. Plaksha already has about 80. And these are people who largely have had professional journeys, people who build exciting businesses. Most of them had the benefit of a great education, but we all sort of now come together in the spirit of building great institutions. When we started Ashoka, when we started the journey on Ashoka in 2007, the idea was to build a top quality liberal arts institution. We felt India had overemphasized on engineering, medicine, and there was need to have a broad-based education, the social sciences, humanities, and sciences. We also wanted to reimagine a lot of the things that education could offer. Discussion-based classes, focus on key skills like critical thinking, problem solving, leadership, and really graduating a set of people who not only do good to themselves, but also do good to the world. So in some sense, really people who are committed to public service, who have the benefit of a broad-based education, but who are really committed to doing good to society. When we started on Plaksha in 2016, it was more reimagining engineering education. We felt technology has to change society. Technology has to work for the betterment of society. We also felt technology education has to become more experiential, more project-based, more hands-on, has to incorporate elements of design thinking, systems thinking, and Plaksha imagines to do that. Both institutions collaborate with some of the top universities around the world. Ashoka collaborated very early with UPenn, Yale. Plaksha collaborates with Berkeley and Purdue. And the efforts while they are in different domains, at some level institutionally are similar. So I think with that sort of context, I will bring in Ashish and Neeraj. Let me start with you, Ashish. Ashish, you had a great career. You've really been the poster boy in some sense of Indian private equity. Studied at Yale and Harvard, came back to India, set up Chris Capital, and then had an outstanding run. And we were all pleasantly surprised when in 2010 you stepped down and said, look, my life is now going to be go toward more towards philanthropy. And I've watched you very closely as we built Ashoka together. What's been the inspiration and why higher education?
Yeah, so Vineet, thank you for that introduction to both institutions. I think for me personally, I always felt that education is the bedrock of any society. India is going through a transformational journey, both in terms of economic transformation and societal transformation. And we have lots of problems to fix in education, starting with primary education. But higher education is where the rubber hits the road, at least in terms of employment and in terms of some of the formative years for students who are in their late teens and early 20s. And Indian higher ed, my own sense was had stagnated. You know, we built some great institutions, the IITs, IIMs, decades ago. We built some great universities a century and a half ago, and you know, those colleges at those universities were in their prime 40, 50 years ago. But then as the West took off, as many of our best and brightest went abroad for their PhDs, they didn't come back. And so there was a hollowing out of Indian higher education. The quality of faculty, especially outside of technical and management education, dropped. And the quality of these institutions really started to, I wouldn't say not only stagnate, but started to go down. And so there was a real opportunity to reimagine the model, which was putting students into a straitjacket, the old British model, and really looking at what skills were required in the 21st century. And so whether it's across technical education or broader liberal arts and sciences education, I think there was so much opportunity. India lacked high quality institutions, was trapped in an old model. And so I think this idea of, you know, working with yourself and others to build a new university was a very exciting one. Really the opportunity, I think the excitement that people would have felt when they were building the IITs and IIMs was the same excitement I think we felt when we embarked on the Ashoka journey. Because it was not just about building one institution, but a paradigm shift in the higher education model for India.
And when you sort of look back, Ashish, we opened Ashoka in 2014. We've been on this for almost 13 years, 14 years. When we look back and from the time we started and whatever we envisaged, what's your sense on what all, in terms of what all we set out to do, on what parameters has Ashoka really stood out and really met some of those goals?
Yeah. So I think, Vineet, in terms of the brand, it's much stronger than any of us expected in a very, very short period of time. May be more a function of the vacuum out there that, as I said earlier, there was a stagnation and it was a fresh approach to bringing a different model to India. I would say also undergraduate education has done very well. You know, there was very little innovation in undergraduate education. And I think Ashoka came in with a whole different way of looking at whether it's, you know, outreach to high schools, to changing the mindset of parents and students, to a different admissions process, different sort of breadth and depth oriented curriculums or foundation courses for students, but also real choice. You could change what you wanted to study as you went along. You could do a double major, major minor. Just that flexibility it offered. The residential environment, which was enriching for students. So I think Ashoka succeeded in terms of the undergraduate side, really doing very well. And the teaching side of the university, I think flourishing in the first few years. I think on the research side, it's still early days. And I think it takes a university time. You need to build critical mass before you start to make a dent in terms of research. But even there, I think in some areas, because humanities and social sciences don't require as much money, I think Ashoka started to make a difference. And then I think in terms of diversity and inclusion, Ashoka did a good job. I mean, 55% of the students are women. They come from all across the country, across the socioeconomic spectrum, applications from 40 countries outside India. So I think a very diverse and inclusive student body is something I don't think any of us had expected, that level of diversity, at the outset. So a number of things worked out well, but it's still very early days in the journey of building a great institution.
And if I may add, Ashish, I think the one thing it also did, it's inspired a whole lot of institutions which are now coming up.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
including Plaksha, which I should say is totally inspired.
I think that, Vineet, may be the longer term, the bigger impact of all these new universities is really inspiring many others, because there's only so much you can do on your own within your boundary walls.
Right. Neeraj, let me come to you. You're as successful as it gets. IIT Delhi Computer Science, IIM Ahmedabad, had a technology career, spent a large time with the Boston Consulting Group, and within a very short span of time, you've sort of now leading BCG Asia. And I having worked with you over the last 6 years, I know you keep an extremely busy day job. What's the inspiration behind Plaksha? And I know you spend crazy time on Plaksha. So where do you find the time and what's the inspiration?
So look, first off, I have to compliment both Ashish and you on what you guys have done with Ashoka, and it's truly been an inspiration, and it's a playbook which many more will emulate over times to come, but that's fantastic, guys. So hats off for that. I have personally, Vineet, been a beneficiary, like many of us, of education. I grew up in a very small town, and what I am today is what my education made me. So I personally realize the power of education, like all of us do, but I've lived it firsthand. So that's shaped me in many ways to come. I have worked a lot in technology. I worked in Silicon Valley early on in my career. Even with BCG, I've done a lot of work in the technology space. I also recognize that technology is a big driver in shaping the world in times to come. And you need to have, and India has had the benefit of great skills, but our universities are not keeping pace with the changing times, and there's room for improvement. So that's one other thing which shapes me. Not just West, which Ashish alluded to, but even if I look eastwards, whether I look at Singapore, China, Japan, Korea, all of them have invested hugely in building local universities as well. So I think it's fundamentally for the long-term competitive advantage of any nation, I think quality education is the single biggest determinant of success in the long term, right? If you take a 5-10 year view, no, but if you take a 20-30 year view, that's the single biggest success factor. So for me, it was very clear, if there's one thing I'll give back on, is in investing time in education. And that's why it has never felt like a job. Even after a busy day, it's always been more fun giving those hours to Plaksha. And it's a journey which is still very early days. It's a journey which is only 4 or 5 years and it has not even hit a decade. And institution building is a multi-decade process. So be early in the journey. The early signs are quite encouraging. That's what I would say.
Right. If I may ask a follow-on question also, Neeraj, and we have debated this often. In technology, India does have role models like the IITs, and often we get asked this question on why Plaksha, right? We both had the benefit of going to those institutions, studying there. And as you said, we immensely benefited. What is Plaksha fundamentally going to change in technology education? How are we imagining it? If you could also throw some color around that.
I think you're absolutely right. IITs have done a phenomenal job in setting a very high standard over the years on technology education. I would say, if I was a little critical in the more recent times, the input still, they're living a little bit more on the, the pedigree created from the past and not evolving fast enough with the changing times. But that you can also criticize some institutions in the West and other parts of the world, right? So it's not, I'm not trying to be unfair here. I think though there's room for improvement on, is a bias towards a technology education which has high aspects of both application to solve some of our hardest problems, be it societal problems, be it technological problems, but also a mindset which combines good education with tinkering to make true change happen. I think the true entrepreneurial spirit of embracing the harder, bigger, grand challenges, if I may use that phrase, and making a true difference, I think that's where Plaksha is fundamentally centered on of creating a different mindset in the education. And I think we want to combine the left brain and the right brain. So we want to combine the technology education with good liberal arts leaning as well, which I think will make people more rounded and also make sure that they are more application oriented. And eventually, I think, as Ashish said earlier, hopefully the playbook is then, we improve the playbook with time, not that we have the perfect playbook, but also the playbook inspires others to change their playbook, right? That will be the biggest vindication of the process.
Right. Ashish, if I can come back and, there is so much discussion been going on lately about also how learning is going to change, whether in the classroom or whether through live lectures or pre-recorded lectures. Ashoka is already finished about 6 years. Plaksha is going to start next year. In some sense, it's a great opportunity for both these institutions to write the new playbook of learning. Most institutions globally are struggling to adapt, thinking about it. What sort of your thoughts there? What role can Ashoka play? And where do you see the crystal ball?
Yeah, so I think, Vineet, right now, of course, a lot of institutions that are up and running are just making a transition to remote teaching. And quite honestly, it's a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction. But I think what it's doing is it's building digital muscle within these organizations. And it's not either or. To me, I think in the next 10 years, we're not going to be saying offline, online. I think it'll be, some blend, some seamless integration. So even the physical campus, we will integrate technology. We may find that it's better to, already at Ashoka, as you know, we assign students reading in advance. And in some cases, faculty do give students something to listen to before they come to the classroom. We may find that the flipped classroom becomes more of the new normal, and faculty find that they need to just record their session, have students do it, maybe even do a little bit of a diagnostic assessment and then come to class, and class is more of a discussion. So I think integrating online technologies more seamlessly into the physical classroom is going to happen. The undergraduate education, in my mind, I don't think there's a substitute for the physical. If you want to go to a top-notch place, because it's not just about the academics and learning from the faculty. It's so much is about being away from home for the first time, the independence, the fun that you have hanging out in hostel rooms late at night, the conversations, the learning from peers, the athletics, the student groups, all of that stuff. So my own sense is we just need to reimagine undergraduate education that's physical by integrating aspects of online. And then there's the opportunity at the master's level, I think, to do things very differently. There, I think coming on campus is less essential. There's a real opportunity cost. And I think that will be reimagined. And of course, we're all going to be lifelong learners. So I think all universities now need to think about a 60-year curriculum, which is what are they doing for undergraduates, but also how can they go back to high schools and have some impact, but also look forward in the journey over the next 50 years of a graduate's life. And their digital plays an even more important role. And in some cases, it may be blended. You do something, you come back physically, and you stay connected. So I think digital holds a lot of promise, but I don't think it's going to upend the undergraduate program, if you ask me.
Neeraj, in Plaksha, we are not only thinking about some of the aspects that Ashish spoke of, but we are also fundamentally rethinking technology education, collapsing the boundaries of engineering disciplines. If you can throw some color, both on the undergraduate majors that we are thinking about at Plaksha and the role that technology will play to enhance learning.
No, I think thanks. Firstly, I think Ashish, I agree with what Ashish said. And I think one thing this crisis tells us is that both ends of the continuum don't work. So fully offline and fully online, right? Both don't work. And the reality has to be in between. And he outlined many aspects of the in between. I think you're absolutely right, Vineet. There's a lot of innovation which will happen on the disciplines itself. a lot of value is now at the intersection of disciplines. That's what I'm seeing increasingly. I see that with our clients. If you look at the top 10 market cap companies in the world, it's hard to say which sector do they come from, because 7 of them are marketplaces, right? And they cut across all sectors, right? Therein lies a story of that old idea of being wedded to one sector or being wedded to one way of thinking is no longer the new normal, right? So I think Plaksha has been actually very creative and an early adopter of this intersection model. So be it intersection of mechanical, electronics, and computing discipline by creating a degree like robotics and cyber physical systems, or be it pushing the boundaries of computer science to say computer science and artificial intelligence, because computer science has become table stakes in some sense, right? And I think the new form of intelligence, how does that get intertwined, becomes more and more critical. And I think what physics did with engineering defined the last 40, 50 years. What biology will do with engineering will define the next many decades to come. So again, the intersection of biosystems and engineering is another important example of that. And similarly, you can take data science and economics and others. So I think I'm repeating myself almost, but what I'm trying to get to is there's a lot of power on focusing on the intersection. And I think that's absolutely critical. On the medium of education itself, I think it has to be a blend. We have to have access to the best ideas from across the world. And that technology today makes possible. You can access the best faculty, you can access the best peer group, and that just fundamentally flattens the knowledge curve, right? Tom Friedman talked about flattening the world. I think it genuinely flattens the knowledge curve, and I'm very excited about the idea which it will allow Indian universities to leapfrog by the flattening of the knowledge curve. So I think that's what I'm really, really excited about.
And just staying, and I think it's a great opportunity for people, young people who are just starting their careers, students, to hear from both of you. COVID in some sense has also made us realize the power of resilience, dealing with adversity. What do you think, Neeraj, in your mind would be of course, what would you tell a student today in these times? And a follow-on question then, what do you think would be, in the post-COVID world, the most critical skills that students may need to imbibe?
So I get asked this question often because I go recruiting and other things here. What do you look for in a student, right? And I normally say curiosity and empathy. I just normally say it's about curiosity and empathy. And maybe that's one phrase I use, but if I make it in a more commonplace parlance, to me, curiosity is the biggest indicator of IQ. It's not about what you know, it's about learning to learn as opposed to learning itself, right? So to me, that is what curiosity symbolizes. Empathy, I've met some very smart kids or very smart individuals who don't have the best EQ or the best empathy, right? And I feel they sometimes peak out and are not able to go beyond, because after a certain level, obviously the IQ is a given, but the EQ truly, truly makes a difference. And I think being empathetic, not towards just fellow humans, but being empathetic towards their environment, which some people now call social quotient or whatever you want to call it, has also become equally important. It was about climate change. When I was, earlier this year, the whole Davos discussion was only about climate change. But equally, I think COVID has taught us that I think it has accelerated that journey much further along and made us recognize front and center that the power of control lies in our hands. We can actually make a difference. It is not something which is somebody else's problem. If we all collectively put our mind to it, we can make a difference. And I think the kids of today are actually more socially conscious than the kids of earlier. So I think they actually naturally take on to that. I think the high schools and others have done a great job of that. And we need to adhere to that aspect of them, I think.
But you're saying in some sense, the two critical aspects of curiosity and empathy stay the way they are.
I think those are eternal in my book.
Right. Okay. Ashish, if I can ask you the same question. I mean, resilience, dealing with adversity, you think the post-COVID world will throw out some more competencies and skill sets?
Yeah, so I think, Vineet, that I think learning to live with ambiguity is an important skill. The world is a complex place. It's ever changing. I think we have to just accept that, change is eternal on many dimensions, personal dimension, work, relationships. And I think dealing with ambiguity and being able to connect the dots between different things is going to be an important skill, going forward. Because I don't think the 21st century is going to be as linear as, the industrial age. I think a second one for me is critical thinking. In the age of technology, social media, there's a real danger of wallowing in other people's thoughts. We already see that everybody reads the same stuff on coronavirus and, just quickly jumps to the same conclusion. But I think having the ability to read, to digest, to think independently, to speak your mind, and to sometimes speak truth to power, I think is a very important facet, because we're going to be less hierarchical going forward. And so having your own mind, being able to speak up, I think is critical. And having a real deep love for learning. It's sort of the curiosity point Neeraj was making, and a love for learning, not just in the work you do, but, just loving life and loving travel and learning new languages and, just soaking up everything. Life's experiences are wonderful. Being a great observer of life and just being that person who doesn't just have bookish knowledge or learn just for the sake of work, but learns a lot through observation, through life, through travel, and in the process goes from becoming well-informed to becoming wise. Those for me would be important traits.
Right. So, I think the good news for people who are hearing is that, COVID may be a big crisis and there is adversity, but the fundamental skills in some sense which define success have not changed, whether it's curiosity, whether it's empathy, critical thinking, learning to live with ambiguity, or even just, as you said, Ashish, just the constant willingness to learn from everything that you watch and see. Let me ask a related question, and maybe Ashish, since you are already speaking, there's so much conversation about education was really first about delivering knowledge. And then, 2-3 decades ago, it started to shift and skills started to become a key part, whether it's writing, communication. In the last 10 years, you hear a lot about inculcating mindset, whether it's character, whether it's the ethical mindset, the growth mindset, entrepreneurial, because, we all recognize that your mindset and your character, or whatever you may call, is perhaps the greatest determinant to success. How are places like Ashoka, or how do you think college education should do that? Or do you think that is something one acquires on their own and college education doesn't need to deal with that?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, Vineet, and a tricky one also, because it would be hard to say. I think we have to recognize that being away from home for the first time, being at college, are very formative years. And so, therefore, they become very, very important in shaping who you are in the future. It doesn't mean to say, obviously, you learn a lot from your parents. And I think a lot of aspects of our character are shaped out of the home in the early years. And it would be incorrect to say that a university is going to take somebody who is a low integrity person and convert them into a high integrity person. But you can definitely shape someone's outlook towards the world. You can make them more open-minded and a better listener. You can expose them to people who they've never met before and change their worldview in that sense. So my own sense is mindset clearly is important. It's all of the above. I'm not a believer that, I know these constant shifts. I think you do need some specific knowledge. Without it, going deep into specific knowledge actually makes you really rigorous in terms of what. So it's not just about the specific knowledge, but tackling. I learned zero accounting or business when I was in college. But the fact that, I learned topology and abstract algebra, I was in math, was extremely rigorous, right? And learning accounting took a couple of weeks thereafter. So I do think the specific knowledge is important in that sense, in that it takes you to a level of rigor. You need certain skills, obviously, and you need the mindsets, and most importantly, you need character. And obviously, universities can do play some role in all dimensions. Obviously, you start early on, and those years are formative and important. But because it's the first time away from home, I think we should look at all 4 dimensions and see what role an institution can play along those dimensions.
And Neeraj, if I can ask you the same question, but in a little bit of a different format, consulting companies like yours do a great job in nurturing talent. And, it's almost, okay, somebody's worked at BCG, you can really tick off like a whole list of character traits that this person would have. Do you think that model has something for higher educational institutions, especially, and I mean the same domain of inculcating mindset?
I was thinking about it when Ashish was speaking as well. Firstly, there's this famous quote, right? Never let school interfere with education. So I think the point he made about education is never only about school and colleges. It's about lifelong learning, right? I mean, we learn every day. If I go to my own firm, BCG, what do we really try to teach people? We try to hire people who have curiosity and empathy. But what we try to then build on that is to say that the collective is better than the individual, right? We bring people with different spikes, and together we can solve hard problems. And that element that we see different faces of the diamond, and together the diamond shines. It gets reinforced over and over again. And that I think there's something colleges can learn from that, because sometimes it's not about I, me, myself. It's about the collective, right? And one person can never, because clients hire us to give them a new perspective, to give them a sharper, and it's a high burden that we get hired for. And if one individual tries to solve that problem, his or her biases will play in fully. But when many people look at the same problem, the collective becomes really much better. So I think group projects, projects where people straddle the length and breadth of a problem, where they talk to somebody on the shop floor, to somebody at the highest level, that exposure, that mindset genuinely creates that, because you see it from different lenses. You can put yourself in the shoes of somebody who is operating in that area. That exposure is welcome, and I think universities can do a better job on creating varied exposures. I think the other one, I think, definitely is cross-cultural. We are very diverse in our talent pool, and diversity could be whether it's different states in India or different nationalities or different backgrounds. People, both economic backgrounds, but just educational backgrounds. I think diversity is a very integral part of growing up. So I think the more diverse a university can be, both in its true experiences, both in student body, faculty, other learning opportunities, I think that can be hugely important. And then last one is meritocratic. Ultimately, I think being truly meritocratic and not let anything else get in the way. Most educational institutions actually tend to do well on that, but we have to continue to remind ourselves that that's critical as well.
So, one thing that got disrupted also during these times is really college education, right? My kid studies abroad. Ashish's girl is also studying abroad, and they are both here. And I know your kids are still in school, but, and especially with all the news that is coming from the US in the last 2 days, whether students can go back to college this term or not. So parents are anxious, students are anxious. So the general level of anxiety, people are wondering whether they should drop a semester, whether, whether they should do online. What are your thoughts? What would you advise some of these young people?
Yeah, I think Vineet, it's, I don't think that people are not going to go to the US anymore. I do think there is a disruption in the near term that causes people to think about what they want to do at the undergraduate level, graduate level, etc. To me, I think the COVID thing will pass, and obviously each person has to make a decision based on their choices. Clearly, physical is better than online. So if I were given the choice, but if it's one semester of online, the rest is physical, I still think it's a very good experience. If this is going to last longer and you're going to be doing online for 3 semesters, I would possibly opt to stay in India and do physical if that's a possibility. But we don't even know in India what's going to happen. So I think there's uncertainty anywhere. I would take the best that's available. I think longer term, to be honest, this whole issue of obviously the world was becoming a smaller place. There are bigger issues now with trade, immigration, deglobalization. But I think for us in India, if we can nurture high quality institutions, the supply side at the end of the day, I think will dictate where students go more than anything else. So if we can build great universities, I think we will stand a chance of holding students back at the undergraduate level, and someday even at the master's PhD level. I think if India is able to, I mean, look at what the Chinese have done, you know, with Tsinghua or Beida or Fudan. Of course, their students go to the US but now with this COVID thing and the backlash against Chinese students, you can rest assured, you know, the PhD program at Tsinghua is going to be a huge beneficiary of this. And so I think COVID will impact mindsets temporarily, but longer term, I think it's the supply that's going to make the difference, because people will always choose based on what's best for themselves or for their children.
Yeah. And just a follow on, and maybe it's the wrong person I'm asking, you did both your undergrad and masters in the US. You know, I would think, Ashish, while Ashoka Plaksha are getting created, there is still a long way to go. I mean, just in the terms of differentiation in quality of our institutions and where we need to go. Maybe from a 2-decade perspective, you would still be a big believer in the sort of US education you got?
I would. I mean, I think, Vineet, that there is something about getting outside your comfort zone. You know, India is still not a very global place. So becoming more of a global citizen. I mean, I learned Spanish and Portuguese and loved Latin America. It would never have happened if I had stayed back in India. You know, there's an aspect of who I am that could not have been created if I did it here. And I think, right, you're right, that for some students, look, I think it's a very small percentage of students anyway who consider going abroad. And I don't think it impacts India overall. So I don't think we have to worry as a country. I mean, it's not like, you know the numbers better than us, but we're talking order of magnitude 15, 20,000 people going every year at the undergraduate level. India has a large number of top-notch students. So whether that number stays at that level or shrinks by 20%, I don't think it impacts the base. The fact that you have 7-8 million new students coming into higher ed every year in India. And I think it's good. If India is to be a global superpower or global economic power, we do need our own students to be educated abroad as well, whether they're going to the US or Europe or Asia. So if I look at it from that perspective, and more are coming back. Yeah. So it's not a bad thing for students to go abroad. And supply is so constrained, is my point, that we can have 100 great universities. There's enough talent in India where some portion can go abroad, and yet the 100 universities in India will still get great students.
Neeraj, you did your master's in the US as well. And of course, a large part of your career after that was in India. You know, how do you, if students had choices today between going abroad and being here, what are some of your thoughts?
Look, I think what the fact that, you know, you have more broader universities where you can study a bunch of different disciplines, where you can interact with people who come with very, very different backgrounds, right? And not one single form or shape, I think is an edge which they have really, really created, and is an edge which holds them in great stead. So I have no doubt about that. And I think that's some of the best universities in the world are in US. More than the universities itself, but I think that methodology of teaching is quite powerful. But I also think equally we are at a turning point in the world in many ways, right? I mean, I head Asia for BCG. I talk about that this century is Asia century, partly because I'm somewhat parochial as part of my job, but I think partly because I deeply believe in it. So I think there is a set of institutions which are getting created from the East, which are going to be very compelling in times to come. So I think this over fixation on only the institutions in the West is probably something which is changing. I mean, this changes slowly. So in 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 years, people don't realize it. But if you take a 20-year view already, if you take the top 100 university in terms of rankings, and I was doing this analysis, even in the last decade, the number in Asia has increased by about 10 to 15. And, you know, an average student may not realize that, right? And if you roll that clock for another decade or two, that number may become even Stevens. It may be half and half. So I think that's the change we're talking about. You're right. It's still each university in itself may take 1 to 2 decades, but we're also living in a world where timeframes are collapsing. So I am a big believer that we need great quality supply all across the world. And the Western institutions should improve the East, and the Eastern should improve the West. And the Indians should, improve the Chinese and the Singaporeans, and vice versa. So I think we should all learn from each other. There is a short-term crisis of economy, geopolitics, you name it, right? Social strife. But I am an optimist. I believe, it will sort itself out. And on an average, the world is getting better.
And what do you feel, Neeraj, since you also head Asia? You think no matter what we may feel about China at this point, more and more Indian students are going to go to other Asian countries to study? Will that exchange be as vibrant as it is between India and the US? Do you think there is merit to that exchange?
Look, I have fundamentally believed that the two biggest advantages US has historically had is democracy and its openness to talent, right? That's made US what it is, right? I mean, it's the single biggest laboratory in the world of bringing the best talent. If they shut the doors to that, or they make it harder for kids, the talent will go everywhere, right? I mean, they will go to Europe, they'll go to Asia, they will go wherever the best opportunities are, and Canada. So many other countries around the world are smarting up to this opportunity. And I hear conversations, because as I said, all of these are decadal changes. You don't realize what is happening on a daily basis. But yes, there's a lot of strengthening going on in institutions around the world in partaking of this opportunity.
But in some sense, both of you do seem to convey the sense that, look, US continues to dominate the higher education landscape. It is the laboratory. It's the place, not only high quality higher education, but also so many other things you learn. The rigor of work, the broad exposure to industry. In some sense, maybe US is lost if their policies were to go in a direction where that access is limited.
Vineet, if I can just add there, I think there was probably a natural trend at play, like Neeraj was saying, where Asia is catching up. I mean, we should remember that, in the year 1900, the best universities in the world were German, right? I mean, Johns Hopkins copied the German model, and however, it took many years before they even were willing to move from teaching to research. And then a century later, the Americans dominated. They're still in a dominant position, but it wouldn't, I think 30, 40, 50 years from now, it's going to be Asia's turn. I think all that's happening with the geopolitics, etc., is maybe accelerating that trend. But there is a broader underlying trend at play here.
So Einstein studied in Germany, Enrico Fermi studied in Italy, right? It is not so far back in time. They were the two best physicists in the world, right?
People don't realize that nobody knows of Humboldt University, but Einstein, Max Planck, Otto von Bismarck, just go back and look at it. There's great.
The interesting thought is that a lot can change in 30, 40 years. So,
yeah, I think so.
So what does the rise of Ashoka and Plaksha and institutions like this mean for India? Do you think?
I want to say one thing. When I went to IIT, NUS was not even a university somebody used to consider going to, right? If you had a choice. But today, at least in rankings, NUS outsmarts IIT. But I'm just saying, so that's happened in the 25 odd years I've been out. So, and if you look back at your alma mater, so alma mater is also what it is today, but also what it will be in times to come. So I think there is while people take a more here and now decision, if I was using a pure financial term, there's a net present value to the decision you should take in education as well. So if I may say that more crudely. So I think you have to focus to the short term, but you also have to keep an eye on the medium and the long term.
And long term for Plaksha, Neeraj, just before we end, considering a lot can change, what is a 20-30 year vision for Plaksha in that sense?
A truly multidisciplinary university, a university which has some of the best, hopefully, talent, not just from India, but also encourages talent to come from other parts of the world, which is also flourishing in both teaching and research. I know these are tall words to say right now, and it feels almost, when we are yet to start. Students which are both online and offline. I can go on and on. But I think truly which makes a dent and a credible alternative to some of the best.
Ashish, Germany, US, could it be India 30 years from now?
I think it could be. I think India could be a serious player, given the energy you're seeing with new universities that have come up in the last decade. But I think for that, we do need to stay the course. We have to realize it's a 30, 40-year journey. We do need also government to play its part in terms of recognizing that staying out of the way has what led universities to, I mean, one is you need some progressive regulation in terms of online, but I think respecting academic freedom and letting institutions do what they do, I think is extremely important. Mobilizing some money for the sciences, what NSF did, NIH did in the US, and what China is doing. So I think a few key things where government needs to play its part, either step in, which is particularly research money, step away, which is really leaving institutions alone, respecting academic freedom, understanding that universities can be noisy places, right? But that's okay. In the long run, they produce extremely fine people who want to serve the country and do good for the country. And having founders and donors and faculty and others committed really over the next, we shouldn't be celebrating, for at least another 30, we should celebrate small victories, but realize that the real prize is still 30, 40 years away. So nobody should rest on their laurels for a long period of time.
And knowing you, Ashish, you will always keep reminding us a lot of hard work still to be done. So I think that's any closing comments from you, Neeraj, before we end this session?
No, look, I'm very energized by some of the new things that are happening in the India scene on education. I think, but what you need is truly a revolution to happen, right? We need thousands of flowers to bloom. So it's about the Ashokas and the Plakshas, but equally about some of our strong existing institutions to up their game as well. I think we need that collectively. And I think the more people come in to contribute to this cause, I think the more we strengthen the cause of our country. I think that's what. So I'll encourage more people to also consider supporting this cause.
Okay, well, thank you. It's been an honor and privilege to know you both. It's been an honor and privilege to work in both helping set up Ashoka and now Plaksha. But that journey has also been special because of people like you and the friendships we forged on the way. It's been so much fun just doing this together. I feel personally, for me, more than any business I built, these two journeys are the most exciting for all the reasons that I spoke of. I think it's probably the same for you, knowing you both. But this has been a very special session to get both of you together to really talk about things that we are deeply attracted to, and especially about this aspect of institution building, which I believe is, and if anybody in the audience, if there's one thing that you want to spend your time in, I would highly encourage that it should be institution building. So come be a part of Ashoka, come be a part of Plaksha. These are collaborative efforts. These are large efforts. They have a place for you. We welcome any students, any children who want to be a part of these institutions. We value merit, we value diversity, we value curiosity, engagement, and we do hope, it's a sincere hope that 20 years, 25 years from now, these institutions sort of become the torchbearer of high quality higher education in India. So I'll end on that note. Thank you, Neeraj, and thank you, Ashish, for joining us today.
Thanks, Vineet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish, Neeraj, and Vineet, for an enriching session.